The night I collapsed at work, I thought the fear of dying alone would be the worst part, but I was wrong. Because when the doctors called my son, he didn't rush to help. He didn't even answer. He blocked my number instead. And while I lay in the ICU fighting for my life, his wife turned my suffering into her newest social media trend, without my permission. Before I continue, subscribe for more stories of love, betrayal, and karma, just like this one. The fluorescent lights in the grocery store always buzzed like angry bees, but that night, the sound felt louder, sharper, like it was drilling straight into the back of my skull. I'd been on my feet since 11 a.m., covering a shift for Linda again, because she called in with another migraine. She was 21, beautiful, and dramatic, and the manager adored her, so she got away with everything. I didn't have that luxury. At 57, I was the opposite of adored. I was dependable. Dependable means replaceable. It was nearly midnight when the dizziness started, not the kind that comes from standing up too fast. This one curled around my ribs and squeezed. I blinked hard, trying to sharpen the soft edges of the grocery aisles, but the world swayed gently, like a boat unsettled by a passing wave. The customer in front of me, a middle-aged man buying frozen dinners and cat food, noticed my hand drifting off the counter. "You all right, ma'am?" "Yeah," I whispered, but the word barely made it out. "Just a long day." I scanned the last item, reached for a bag, and the floor moved. Or maybe I moved. It was hard to tell. My vision blurred into a smear of colors, blue freezer lights, red sale signs, silver carts. Then everything snapped sideways. Someone shouted. I felt my body crash into the register, my knees buckling, the cold tile rushing up to meet me. My cheek hit something hard, maybe the floor, maybe the edge of a basket. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered because the world had become one long, echoing tunnel. Call 911. She's not breathing right. Get the manager. Their voices faded in and out like radio static. I tried to inhale, but my chest tightened, squeezing out air like someone wringing a wet towel. My fingers tingled, then went numb. I felt the weight of my own body turning foreign and heavy. I wanted to say, "I'm okay," because that's what I'd said my whole life, even when it wasn't true. But no sound came, only a faint, pathetic wheeze. Then darkness swallowed me whole. A cold rush of air hit my face. I blinked, but the brightness overhead made my eyes water instantly. Someone was pushing a gurney, fast. I felt the jolt of every turn. "Mom? Can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can." A paramedic's voice filtered through the fog. His gloved hand wrapped around mine, warm and steady. I tried to squeeze, but my fingers barely twitched. Vitals dropping. "Keep her alert." "I'm trying," the paramedic muttered under his breath. I wanted to tell him my name. I wanted to ask where my purse was. I wanted to ask why breathing felt like dragging air through a needle hole. But I floated in and out of consciousness, barely tethered to the world. Sirens wailed somewhere behind me, or maybe around me, or maybe inside my skull. Doors slammed open, voices overlap. Critical? Possible cardiac event. BP is unstable. Get her to trauma. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or dying. Maybe both. They lifted me under harsh white lights. Cold metal pressed against my back. Machines beeped. Something tightened around my arm. Something else slid into my vein. My vision stuttered in and out like an old TV struggling to stay on. Family. Anyone listed. She has a son, Daniel Martin. Call him. My heart fluttered weakly at the name. Daniel, my boy. My only child. If anything would keep me alive. It was the hope of hearing his voice. A nurse tapped at calling now. I listened, breath shallow. 1 ring, 2, 3, 4. Voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. The doctor leaned over me. "We'll leave a message." But they didn't get the chance. The call ended on its own. The nurse frowned and hit redial. Immediately, the screen flashed. "That's odd," she murmured. "Let me try texting him." She typed, "This is St. Matthew's ER. Your mother has been admitted to the ICU." She hit send. Instantly, message not delivered. She stared at the screen, confused. "Is your number blocked?" The doctor shot her a warning look, but the damage was done. My throat tightened, not from the medical emergency, but from something far crueler. "No," I whispered hoarsely. But deep down, I knew. Daniel hadn't spoken to me in 4 months. Not since the fight. Not since Olivia twisted my words, like she always did. Not since he yelled, "You're toxic, Mom," and walked out of my house with his wife gripping his arm. I told myself it was temporary, that he'd cool down, that he'd call. He didn't. Now, lying half dead under blinding hospital lights, I learned the truth. He had blocked me. Completely. Permanently. The shame felt like someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed my heart barehanded. The nurse tried calling another number, his work line, his emergency contact, his office. No answer. She tried emailing him. Nothing. I watched each attempt like I was watching someone try to revive a relationship that had died months ago. "Mom," the doctor said softly, "we're going to take care of you. Right now, focus on breathing. Breathing. If only it were that simple." I woke up hours later in the ICU tubes. Wires, beeping monitors, all of it felt surreal, like a medical drama I'd watched too many times. But nothing was entertainment. Everything hurt. My throat, my chest, my dignity. The room was dim except for the soft glow of machines. A nurse checked my vitals, humming gently. She looked too young to understand the kind of heartbreak that can make a person physically ill. "Your numbers are stabilizing," she said. "You're lucky your coworkers acted fast. Lucky." Funny word for the moment I found out my son wouldn't press a single button to see if I was alive. I drifted again, exhaustion heavy as cement. When I woke the next morning, sunlight spilled into the room through half-open blinds. My head throbbed, but my mind felt clearer. The nurse from earlier walked in, phone in hand, an uncertain expression on her face. Mrs. Martin, do you use any social media?" I frowned. "No. Never." "Do you have a daughter-in-law named Olivia?" My stomach tightened.
"Yes, why?"
She turned the phone toward me. My breath caught. It was a photo of me, in this very bed. Eyes closed, oxygen mask, skin pale. My hair flattened awkwardly against the pillow, looking vulnerable, exposed, helpless. And right above it, the username. Live Inspiration Daily, a wellness influencer account. Olivia's account. Her caption read, "Please keep my mail in your prayers tonight. Life is precious. Hold your loved ones close. Phi ICU fast, stay strong family 20, 7,000 likes, 3,000 comments. People saying things like, "Sending love, stay strong queen. She's in our prayers. You're such a good deal for being there." Good deal. I almost laughed. Or cried. It was unclear. Olivia wasn't here. She didn't answer when the hospital called her number either. But she sure found the time to post a highly edited, perfectly angled shot of me near death. Where did she get that? My voice cracked. "She said your son sent it," the nurse whispered. My chest tightened again, worse than before, not medically, emotionally. My son didn't answer the hospital. He blocked my number. But he could send his wife a picture of me suffering. Or maybe Olivia asked for it. Maybe she pressured him. Maybe he fell for her dramatics. But no matter how I sliced it, the betrayal tasted the same. "How many people have seen this?" I murmured. The nurse hesitated. "A lot. It's trending. My near-death experience was trending. I looked at the picture again. How fragile I seemed, how pathetic, how easy it would be for strangers to make assumptions, write pity comments, use me as an emotional prop in their day. And all I could think was, my son used to be the one who climbed into my lap when he was sick. He used to cry when I scraped my knee. He used to tell me I was his favorite person in the world. Where did that little boy go?" I closed my eyes. A slow tear slipped down my cheek. The nurse gently wiped it away. "I'm so sorry. This is not okay." It wasn't. But it was only the beginning. Because while I lay there trying to breathe through pain the machines couldn't measure, Olivia posted another update. A video. Soft piano music. My unconscious face blurred aesthetically. A solemn voiceover in her dramatic influencer tone. "Family is everything. Even when they hurt us. Even when they push us away. I'm choosing forgiveness today. For her and for me. Forgiveness. I wasn't the one who did anything. But the comments flooded in. "You're so strong. Such a good daughter-in-law. You're an angel. She doesn't deserve you. Stay positive, queen." My hands trembled, not from the medical condition, from rage, humiliation. Olivia wasn't visiting me. She wasn't calling the hospital. She wasn't asking how I was. She was using me. For content, for likes, for sympathy, for attention. And somewhere in the middle of all this, my son wasn't defending me. He wasn't telling her to stop. He wasn't showing up. Instead, he was sharing her posts, adding comments like, "So hard right now. Thanks for the prayers." He cared enough to comment, just not enough to come. A cold realization crept through me, heavier than any machine attached to my body. I wasn't just abandoned. I was exploited. And as I lay there, staring at the blinking ICU monitors, one thing became painfully clear. This betrayal was far deeper and far darker than I had ever imagined. When I finally gained enough strength to sit up in bed, the room spun like a carousel. The machines beeped steadily, reminding me that I was alive. But alive didn't feel like a victory. Alive felt like a cage. I was tethered to tubes, cords, and monitors, and to the knowledge that my own son hadn't even tried to come see me. Olivia, on the other hand, had turned my suffering into her latest social media triumph. She posted again the moment she thought I was stable, this time a video clip of the ICU hallway with the caption, "Life is unpredictable. Cherish your elders. Pan Family Matters Pi Few Chronicles." It had 29,000 views within minutes. The nurse who checked my vitals whispered, "I don't understand how she even got that footage. Security cameras are strict here." I didn't need to understand. I already knew. Olivia was clever, manipulative, and obsessed with turning tragedy into spectacle. And somewhere in the shadows of this manipulation was my son Daniel, agreeing, silently allowing it. For a moment, I thought about confronting her online, posting a message, explaining the truth, but even imagining typing my own words on a screen made my hands shake with weakness and rage. Social media had become a weapon against me, and I was defenseless. The hours crawled. Nurses came and went, sometimes asking if I wanted water, sometimes checking my vitals. But the real hurt wasn't physical. It was the betrayal gnawing at me from the inside. I kept asking myself, why? Why would Daniel block me and allow this? The truth, though, was more complicated than I could admit. Daniel wasn't cruel. Not exactly. He was afraid. Afraid of Olivia, afraid of her wrath, afraid of making waves in a marriage that, in his mind, needed perfect calm. He had always been conflict-averse, and Olivia had learned to manipulate that. She whispered, cajoled, threatened behind closed doors, and he obeyed, thinking it was easier than fighting. But it wasn't easier. Not when your mother is lying in a hospital bed, vulnerable, and the world thinks she's just a sick prop in someone else's story. By mid-afternoon, the hospital room was flooded with sunlight. I could see the dust motes dancing in the light, tiny particles floating lazily as if mocking the chaos of my life. My phone, which had been silent, vibrated weakly on the bedside table. A notification. From Daniel. My heart jumped. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe he'd realized the horror of leaving me alone. Maybe, but it wasn't a call, it was a forwarded link. Olivia's latest post. I felt my stomach drop. I was more invisible to my own son than a stranger passing on the street. Instead of taking responsibility, he was amplifying Olivia's narrative. My suffering had become their content, their story, their carefully curated moral lesson for the internet. I whispered the words aloud, though no one answered. How can he do this? The nurse shook her head. I've seen a lot of family drama, but this is different. Different indeed. Because what was happening to me wasn't just neglect. It was performative. It was public humiliation. Every like, every share, every comment was a tiny dagger twisted into my chest. Later that evening, another nurse came in, holding a tablet. Mrs. Martin, someone from your work sent this. They're asking if you're okay. I blinked at the screen. A group chat had been created among my coworkers. A few photos of me collapsed on the floor at the grocery store were attached. The captions were sympathetic. Get well soon. Hang in there. We're praying for you. And then I noticed, mixed in with genuine concern, were screenshots of Olivia's posts. This is wild, one coworker wrote. She's trending online wild, trending viral. My pain had become entertainment. I sank back against the pillows, unable to comprehend the scale of it. I was 2,700 likes deep in the hands of strangers, none of whom knew me. All they knew was the story Olivia had told them. And my son, he was still absent. The next day, a social worker came to see me. Her face was sympathetic, but her eyes were wary, scanning the room as if she expected me to erupt. Mrs. Martin, we understand this is difficult, she said. We need to discuss your care and any visitors who might be involved. Social media, well, it complicates things. I swallowed hard. Complicates things. I croaked, it's not complicated, it's betrayal. My son is betraying me. His wife is exploiting me. And everyone else is cheering. She nodded slowly. I understand. Unfortunately, this isn't uncommon. Families sometimes use illness for attention, for sympathy, or even for control. Control. That word landed like a brick. Olivia had always been the puppet master, pulling strings behind the scenes. Daniel had always been too weak, or too afraid, to cut the strings. And I had always assumed he would fight for me if it ever came to this. Apparently, I had been wrong. Hours later, a nurse brought me a plate of food. My appetite was gone. I couldn't stomach the thought of eating while thinking about how public my suffering had become. My eyes drifted to the phone again. Another notification. Another post from Olivia, a close-up selfie of herself holding my hospital gown in the frame captioned, "Even when life puts us in the hardest positions, love and patience win. Stay strong, everyone. Family Chronicles, Faye Family First, Faye Love Wins." The comments were growing exponentially. A few people even sent gifts to the hospital addressed to me. Flowers, fruit baskets, personalized notes. None of them were mine. None of them came from my family. And still, my son did nothing. By the second day, I began to notice something even more disturbing. Olivia was clearly using hashtags and trendy captions to maximize exposure. Fen Family First wasn't an expression of care. It was a calculated move to make herself look compassionate, heroic even, while casting me as the vulnerable, helpless subject of her content. I felt sick. Not from my illness, but from the layers of manipulation surrounding me. In a rare moment of clarity, I asked the nurse, can she even do this? Share photos like this? She shook her head. It's technically a violation. But enforcement is complicated. And unless you press charges or request it, there's little they can do quickly. I pressed my lips together, considering. It wasn't about legality. It was about dignity. Something I hadn't felt in years, but that still mattered fiercely. That night, I overheard a conversation between the ICU charge nurse and another staff member. They were talking about Olivia's post reaching influencers, trending hashtags, and even local news outlets. My life, my near death, was being consumed by strangers, all for her benefit. I tried to sleep, I really did. But every time my eyes closed, I imagined the comments, the likes, the applause for her as if I were a prop in her show. And in the back of my mind, Daniel's face hovered, silent, absent, complicit in the worst way. On the third day, an unexpected visitor arrived. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't Olivia. It was my former coworker, Carla. She had been at the store that night and had stayed in touch with my manager. She walked in, carrying a small bag of snacks and a look of genuine concern. "I couldn't just sit at home," she said, setting the bag down on the side table. "I saw the posts online. I had to come." Tears pricked my eyes. For the first time in days, someone had come without cameras, without hashtags, without ulterior motives. Just for me. "I didn't know anyone could be so cruel," I whispered. Carla took my hand. "It's not you. It's them. And you're not alone, even if Daniel isn't here yet." Her presence was a small anchor, but it reminded me of another truth. I couldn't rely on Daniel. Not now. Not ever, if he continued to let Olivia dictate everything. Later that evening, I noticed a subtle shift online. People were beginning to question Olivia's intentions. A few commenters asked, "Where's her son? Shouldn't he be at her side?" Others speculated, "Why is the daughter-in-law filming this?" The small sparks of doubt gave me hope. Maybe the world could see her for what she was. Maybe the truth would come out. But that hope was quickly shadowed by a new post. Olivia had captured a nurse adjusting my IV, framed artistically with a filter that made the hospital room look ethereal. Her caption, "Caring hands, healing hearts. Every step counts. Fenaishore chronicles fifles the mel love." Even the skeptical commenters were distracted by her polished storytelling. It was impossible to compete with someone so practiced at manipulation. I closed my eyes again, exhausted. I had survived the collapse, survived the ICU, survived my physical illness. But the emotional toll was relentless. The betrayal cut deeper than any illness ever could. And still, Daniel had not appeared. Not once, not a call, not a visit, just silence. I realized then that my fight wasn't just against illness. It wasn't just for survival. It was against invisibility, against exploitation, against a son who had chosen his wife over his mother in the worst possible moment. And somewhere in the depths of my pain, I knew something else of the battle had only just begun. Because if they thought they could control my story, control my image, control my life from a hospital bed, they had another thing coming. I was weak, yes. But I was still alive. And alive meant I still had a voice. And one day they would hear it. By the fourth morning, the ICU felt less like a hospital and more like a stage. Machines beeped rhythmically, nurses whispered quietly, and outside the room, life moved on as if I were invisible. And yet, on the internet, I was anything but invisible. Olivia's posts had escalated. She had somehow convinced herself, and apparently others, that she was a hero, documenting my suffering as a lesson in family love, while I lay helpless, vulnerable, and unaware of the millions of eyes watching me as if I were an exhibit. But something shifted that morning. The charge nurse, a tall woman named Monica, came in with a clipboard and a look I hadn't seen before, serious, almost conspiratorial. She pulled my curtain aside and said quietly, "Mrs. Martin, I don't usually do this, but I think you need to know what's going on behind the scenes." I blinked at her, suddenly alert. "What do you mean?" Monica glanced around nervously. "Your daughter-in-law, Olivia. She's using your condition to boost her social media profile. That's already bad enough. But it's getting attention from sponsors, people who want her to monetize your illness. She's profiting from your pain." I felt bile rise in my throat. Profiting? What, how? Companies are contacting her to feature her posts. They're offering gifts, partnerships. "This is serious, Mrs. Martin. She's treating you like a prop for her brand. Your son is letting it happen." The room spun. My chest tightened. I could barely breathe. My son, my only child, wasn't just absent, he was complicit. He had allowed my suffering to become a currency for Olivia's influence. I tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper emerged. I can't believe this." Monica put a reassuring hand on mine. "You're not alone. There's someone I can call who might help you. Someone who's willing to speak to the hospital administration and even confront Olivia if necessary." "Ooh," I croaked, panic creeping in. "His name is Mark. He's a patient advocate, and he's been working with families in situations like this. He'll help you take control back." Hope flickered faintly, like sunlight cutting through storm clouds. For the first time since my collapse, I felt that maybe I wasn't completely powerless. By mid-morning, Mark arrived, a middle-aged man in a crisp suit with a calm demeanor and a reassuring smile. He had read the social media posts, checked hospital regulations, and immediately began formulating a plan. "First," he said, "we need to limit access. Olivia shouldn't be allowed to film or post from the hospital anymore. Second, we need to make sure your son understands the severity of what he's allowed to happen. And third, he paused, looking at me with intensity. Moo, reclaim your story. You deserve dignity, not exploitation. I nodded, trembling. For the first time, I felt someone was on my side. Someone who could see the betrayal for what it was and was willing to act. But the battle wouldn't be easy. That afternoon, Olivia posted yet another video, this time a time-lapse of me sleeping, captioned, "Oven and rest, my mile teaches me strength. 5Q inspiration, Faye family goals for stay strong." I closed my eyes and pressed my hand against my forehead. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted Daniel to appear and finally defend me, but he didn't, not yet. Mark and Monica quickly took action. They contacted the hospital administration, citing patient privacy violations and unauthorized filming. The administrators were sympathetic but cautious. They couldn't immediately ban Olivia, but they could issue a warning and monitor her access more closely. Meanwhile, I began to learn more about why Daniel had stayed silent. Through quiet conversations with the nurses, I realized he had been terrified of conflict with Olivia. She had a way of framing arguments so that he always felt like the villain. She whispered behind closed doors, cast doubts on his judgment, and convinced him that anything he did for me would cause a fight or damage the marriage. I felt a surge of anger I hadn't known I was capable of. Fear, yes. Helplessness, yes. But anger, raw, hot, relentless too. Daniel's absence wasn't just cowardice. It was a pattern that had been cultivated, groomed over years of manipulation by Olivia. By the evening, my strength had returned enough for a brief conversation with Mark. "We're going to expose her," he said quietly, almost a whisper. "Not just online, but to the people who matter. We'll make sure she can't profit from this anymore." I nodded, gripping the edge of the hospital bed. I can't believe my son would let this happen. He's under her influence," Mark explained. "But he can be reminded who his mother is. That's our next step." Over the next day, Monica and Mark worked together to gather evidence. They took screenshots of Olivia's posts, documented the unauthorized filming, and prepared a formal complaint to the hospital and, potentially, social media platforms. Each time I saw another post from Olivia, my pulse raced, but the fire in my chest had shifted from panic to determination. I would not be a passive victim any longer. That night, as I lay in the hospital bed, I received an unexpected visitor. A nurse who had worked with Daniel when he was a teenager. She had retired years ago, but still kept in touch. "I heard what happened," she said softly, taking my hand. "Your son, he's been struggling with Olivia's control for years. He wants to help, but he's scared. You have to make him see that fear isn't love. You need to reclaim your bond before it's too late." Her words hit me hard. My son wasn't gone, not completely. He was trapped in a web Olivia had spun around him. I felt both hope and despair twisting together. If I wanted Daniel back, not just as a son who visited a hospital bed, but as a son who could stand up for me, I needed to act carefully, strategically, and decisively. The next morning, Olivia tried to post yet again. But this time, Mark and Monica were ready. They intercepted the uploads, flagged the content, and notified the platform. Olivia received warnings and her posts were temporarily taken down. When she called Daniel later that day, he hesitated. The first real hesitation I had heard in weeks. He had begun to question the narrative Olivia had built around us. Meanwhile, I began reclaiming my own voice. With Mark's help, I dictated a statement for the hospital's internal communications and social media team. I spoke about dignity, respect, and privacy. I didn't accuse Olivia directly. I simply reasserted my humanity, my rights, and my story. The statement went live and immediately comments flooded in, not just support, but criticism of anyone who had exploited my vulnerability. The tide was shifting. Slowly, subtly, the world began to see the truth. Olivia's perfect, polished influencer persona was cracking under the pressure of reality. But the most important battle remained Daniel. That evening, the hospital allowed a brief, monitored visit. Daniel appeared hesitant, pale, and guilt-ridden. He didn't speak immediately. He only looked at me, eyes wide, ashamed. I could see the conflict in him, the pull between fear of Olivia and love for me. "Mom," he whispered finally. I didn't know what to do. I took a deep breath, feeling every ounce of pain, betrayal, and love coiling together. "Daniel, you have to choose. You can't let her manipulate you anymore. Not when it matters most. You need to stand with me." He looked away, shame pressing down like a physical weight. I could feel the history between us. The fights, the misunderstandings, the manipulation. But I also felt the spark of something more powerful, hope. Mark and Monica had prepared the hospital staff for this confrontation. They quietly ensured no cameras, no witnesses except those who mattered. Olivia couldn't exploit this moment. "I am scared," Daniel admitted finally. She told me if I sided with you, I'd lose everything. She said I'd ruin my marriage." I swallowed. Daniel, standing up for what's right isn't ruining anything. Living a lie, letting people exploit us, that's the ruin. You're stronger than you think. You've always been stronger than you think. Tears welled up in his eyes. For the first time, I saw him not as a son who had abandoned me, but as a young boy caught in a storm he didn't know how to navigate. That night, after Daniel left, I lay back in the hospital bed, exhausted but determined. The first real cracks in Olivia's control had begun. Social media momentum was slowly turning. My statement had gone viral, overshadowing her narrative. Daniel's hesitation was a sign that change was possible. And I felt a strange, renewed sense of strength coursing through me. For the first time since my collapse, I allowed myself to imagine a future beyond betrayal and exploitation. I could survive Olivia's manipulation, reclaim my dignity, and even mend the fragile bond with my son. But I also knew the fight was far from over. The next morning, as the ICU buzzed with its usual rhythm, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. The kind of hope that rises quietly, almost imperceptibly, but strong enough to push you forward. I wasn't just a patient anymore. I was a strategist, a survivor, and a mother who refused to be invisible. The battle lines had been drawn. Olivia had made her moves, exploiting my vulnerability and twisting public perception. Daniel had been trapped, caught between fear and love. And I had allies now, people who could help me reclaim my story and my life. And somewhere deep inside, I knew the real twist. The one Olivia couldn't see coming was still ahead, because while she was focused on likes, shares, and sponsorships, I had something she would never have: the truth. And truth, I knew, always had a way of coming out. The tension in the ICU that morning was palpable, even for someone as accustomed to quiet hospital corridors as Monica. The usual hum of machines seemed louder, sharper, almost anticipating the storm that was about to unfold. Olivia had arrived unannounced, phone in hand, seemingly oblivious to the warnings she had received the day before. She flashed her usual dazzling smile at the nurses, the kind that said, "I'm untouchable," and began setting up her phone as if filming my room was still perfectly acceptable. Monica and Mark were already waiting, their presence deliberate and firm. "Olivia," Mark said calmly but with unmistakable authority. "We need to talk." Olivia's smile faltered just slightly, a flicker of hesitation. "Oh, what's this about?" Her voice was sweet, rehearsed, like a TV host introducing a segment. "You've violated patient privacy multiple times," Monica said, her tone clipped. "We have documentation, timestamps, screenshots. Your posts have not only exploited Mrs. Martin's condition, but they've also violated hospital policy and could be subject to legal action." Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line. I was just trying to spread awareness. Support her." "Support," I echoed, my voice stronger than I expected. Support doesn't mean turning someone's suffering into entertainment. Support doesn't mean thousands of strangers seeing me in my most vulnerable moments while my own son does nothing. Support doesn't mean profiting from someone else's pain. The words hung in the room like a physical weight. Olivia's expression wavered between indignation and panic. She looked to Daniel, perhaps for backup, but he stood frozen in the corner, guilt written across his face. "You're wrong," she finally said, attempting to regain control. "People love this. They're inspired by me, by my story, by how I'm caring for my MIO. Your story?" I snapped, feeling heat rise in my chest. "This isn't your story. It's mine, and you stole it. You turned my pain into your content, and you convinced my son to help you cover it up." Daniel swallowed hard, finally stepping forward. "Mom, I didn't realize, I thought she was just trying to help." "You thought?" I repeated sharply. "You didn't even call me. You didn't come when I collapsed. You let her post me online while I was fighting for my life. You thought that was helping." His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, he looked like the little boy I had raised, scared but capable of understanding right from wrong. I was afraid," he admitted. "She can be controlling." I didn't know what to do. I softened slightly but didn't let my guard down. "Fear is not an excuse, Daniel. Not when someone you love is lying in a hospital bed. You need to stand up, for me and for yourself. You can't let her control your actions anymore." Mark stepped forward. "We've already contacted the social media platform. Olivia's posts have been flagged, and she's facing potential account suspension. The hospital administration is monitoring her. Any further violations will have consequences beyond social media." Olivia's composure finally cracked. She looked between the three of us, her voice rising. "This is ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong. Everyone loves my content. I'm helping her." "Helping?" I said, my voice calm but deadly. "No, Olivia. You've been exploiting me. You've turned my suffering into a spectacle. That's not helping, it's abuse. And now the world knows it." A nurse who had been quietly observing stepped forward, holding a tablet. She displayed a feed of comments from Olivia's latest posts. The tide had already begun to turn. People were calling her out. Why is she filming the patient? This is not okay. Where's the son? This is exploitation, not inspiration. Olivia's face paled. They don't understand. They understand perfectly, Mark said. And now, you will too. This ends here. No more posts, no more filming. You will not profit from someone else's pain. Not now, not ever. For the first time, Olivia looked genuinely afraid. She realized that her carefully curated image of heroism had crumbled in the face of truth. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She had no words, no defense, no charm left. Daniel took a step closer to me. Mom, I want to make this right. I see now that I was wrong. I should have come. I should have defended you. I looked at him, my heart aching but relieved. You can start by standing with me now. Not with her. Not with the lies. Stand with me, Daniel. Protect me from those who would exploit me. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I will, I promise. Monica watched the scene quietly, her presence a stabilizing force. Good. Now that the immediate threat is managed, we can focus on your care without interference. Olivia will be escorted out if she refuses to comply. Olivia looked around the room, realizing she was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Her face twisted with anger, then something softer. Fear, maybe regret, maybe both. Without another word, she picked up her phone, muttered something under her breath, and left the room. The door closed behind her with a definitive click, like a seal on a chapter of my life that had been toxic for too long. I exhaled deeply, the tension in my body loosening slightly. Daniel came to sit beside me, taking my hand in his. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know she would do this. I didn't know how to stop it. I squeezed his hand, feeling the fragility of the moment. It's not just about stopping her, Daniel. It's about learning to stand up, about knowing that fear is not a reason to abandon the people you love. You have to protect yourself and those you care about, not the narratives others create. He nodded, wiping his eyes. I understand. I promise, I'll never let anyone hurt you like this again. Mark stepped back, observing the reunion quietly. This is a start. You've regained control, but remember, there will be repercussions. Olivia will likely try to retaliate online. But now, you have your voice. You have the truth on your side. For the first time since my collapse, I felt a sense of empowerment. The fear and helplessness that had consumed me for days began to lift. I had survived the physical ordeal, and now I had survived the emotional and psychological manipulation. Later that evening, the hospital administration confirmed that Olivia's account had been temporarily suspended pending review. They issued a formal warning and made it clear that any further attempt to exploit a patient would result in permanent action, possibly legal consequences. I lay back in bed, finally able to breathe without the constant gnawing of anxiety. Daniel stayed beside me, silent but present. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace, not complete but real. Monica brought in a small bouquet of flowers that had arrived from a neighbor who had learned about the situation through the viral posts. These are for you, she said softly. Some people saw the truth, and they wanted to show support. I smiled faintly, feeling the warmth of genuine care for the first time in days. It was a reminder that, despite the betrayal and the exploitation, there were still people in the world who acted out of kindness, not self-interest. As night fell, I reflected on the events of the past days. The collapse, the betrayal, the exploitation, and finally the confrontation. All of it had taken a toll. But it had also taught me something invaluable: resilience. The ability to reclaim control over my life and my story, to stand up against manipulation, and to demand respect and dignity. Daniel stayed until visiting hours ended, holding my hand and promising to stay by my side. For the first time, I believed him. I believed that he could learn to navigate the manipulation he had been subjected to and make better choices. And though Olivia had been temporarily silenced, I knew the world would watch for her next move. But this time I was ready. I had allies, evidence, and most importantly, my own voice. I would no longer be a passive participant in someone else's narrative. As I closed my eyes that night, the beeping machines around me felt less like a cage and more like a heartbeat. A reminder that I had survived, and that survival included not just the body, but the spirit. The battle had been won, at least for now, and the next steps would be about healing, reclaiming my life, and ensuring that those who had tried to exploit me could no longer do so. In that moment, I realized something profound. Even in the most vulnerable state, even when betrayal seems insurmountable, truth and courage could prevail. And with that realization, I drifted into a peaceful, albeit tired sleep, finally feeling like the fight had turned in my favor. The days following the confrontation felt surreal. The ICU, which had been a place of fear, betrayal, and manipulation, slowly transformed into a sanctuary. Olivia had been effectively barred from visiting, and the hospital administration was closely monitoring any attempt she might make to exploit the situation. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without the constant gnawing anxiety that had plagued me. Daniel stayed close. He no longer hovered in fear or uncertainty. He was present, supportive, and genuinely remorseful. Every day, he checked my vitals, asked questions about my recovery, and listened when I wanted to talk. I could see a change in him. A shift from someone who had allowed himself to be manipulated to someone willing to take responsibility for his actions. The internet, which had once been a source of humiliation, gradually turned into a tool for empowerment. Mark helped me craft a careful statement about patient privacy, dignity, and exploitation. The post, shared through official hospital channels and my personal accounts, struck a chord. People responded with overwhelming support, offering encouragement, sharing their own stories of betrayal, and condemning the exploitation of vulnerable patients. Olivia, now facing the reality of her account suspension and the mounting scrutiny online, retreated from public attention. Her carefully curated image of benevolence had been dismantled, replaced by criticism and skepticism. For the first time, I realized how fragile the illusion of control could be when confronted with truth and courage. Recovery was slow but steady. Physical therapy sessions became part of my routine, and with Daniel by my side, I began to regain my strength. Each small step, walking down the hospital corridor, lifting a tray of food, even laughing at a nurse's joke, felt like a victory. The trauma of the collapse and betrayal was still there, but it no longer defined me. One afternoon, Monica came to check on me with a small smile. "You're looking stronger every day," she said. "I think it's more than just the medicine. You've found your voice. That matters." I nodded, feeling a swell of gratitude. Her guidance, Mark's support, and the small but meaningful presence of friends and colleagues had made all the difference. I realized that true strength wasn't just surviving an illness, it was reclaiming your life when others tried to exploit or silence you. Daniel sat beside me that evening, holding my hand. "Mum," he said softly, "I know I can't undo what happened, but I want to be better. I want to stand up for you, for us, for our family. I don't want to let anyone hurt you again." Tears filled my eyes. That's all I could ever ask, Daniel. Just being here, being honest, being willing to learn, that's enough. It's more than enough. The bond between us, which had been strained and fractured by fear, manipulation, and absence, began to heal. We talked for hours, sharing memories, regrets, and hopes for the future. Daniel expressed remorse not just for the hospital incident, but for the months of distance and avoidance. I listened, acknowledged his feelings, and allowed myself to forgive him. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing past mistakes, it was about freeing ourselves from the weight of anger and rebuilding trust. Outside the hospital, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Friends and colleagues reached out, offering support and celebrating my recovery. The experience had left scars both physical and emotional, but it had also revealed the people and relationships that truly mattered. Social media continued to buzz, but the narrative had shifted. Where once I had been a passive victim in Olivia's content, I now had control over my story. I shared posts about recovery, resilience, and patient rights, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. People expressed solidarity, shared similar experiences, and praised the courage it took to reclaim one's dignity. Through it all, I learned the value of boundaries. Olivia's intrusion had taught me that protection of one's personal life and health was paramount. I set firm limits on who could visit, who could post updates, and who could speak on my behalf. This wasn't just about social media. It was about reclaiming agency over my own life. The hospital administration recognized the importance of our case. They implemented stricter policies on filming and sharing patient information, citing my experience as a cautionary example. What had begun as a deeply personal betrayal evolved into a broader lesson for the community, helping protect other vulnerable patients from exploitation. By the time I was discharged, Daniel and I had established a new pattern: open communication, honest boundaries, and mutual respect. He had learned the cost of inaction and the importance of standing up for those we love, even when fear tempts us to remain silent. I had learned the power of resilience, the necessity of allies, and the strength that comes from reclaiming one's own story. The night before leaving the hospital, I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. The world seemed vast, alive, and full of possibilities. I reflected on the past days. The collapse, the betrayal, the viral posts, the confrontation, and the slow reclamation of dignity. Each moment had been painful, humbling, and transformative. I whispered softly to myself, I survived. I am stronger. I am heard. Daniel came up beside me and placed his hand over mine. We survived, he said quietly. Together. And in that shared silence, I felt a profound sense of closure. The ordeal was over, the betrayal confronted, and the relationship healed. I had faced the worst: abandonment by my son, exploitation by Olivia, and the public humiliation of social media. But I had endured, reclaimed my dignity, and emerged stronger, more self-aware, and more resilient. As I walked out of the hospital the next day, supported by Daniel and the quiet presence of Monica and Mark, I felt a renewed sense of life. I had faced the darkness, confronted the betrayal, and reclaimed my story. The world could watch, comment, or speculate, but the truth belonged to me, and I would carry it with dignity, strength, and courage. The lessons lingered: never allow others to exploit your vulnerability, always reclaim your voice, and stand firm for the people and principles that matter. Olivia's manipulation had failed, not because of luck, but because I refused to be silent. And Daniel, once trapped by fear, had finally learned that courage is the only path to genuine loyalty and love. As we drove home, Daniel reaching across the seat to hold my hand, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in weeks. My life had been upended, my trust tested, and my heart wounded. But I had survived, and surviving meant more than just existing. It meant reclaiming dignity, love, and control over the story of my life. I smiled faintly, turning to Daniel. "We have work to do," I said softly. He nodded, understanding fully. "Together," he said. And for the first time in a long while, I believed it.